The afternoon sun streamed through enormous crystal light fixtures in the Whitmore Grand Hotel's entrance hall, throwing sharp-edged patterns of brightness onto floors of stone buffed until they mirrored the ceiling above. Constance Whitmore moved through territory she'd personally conceived and built, yet her footsteps today answered to someone else's will. Leon Hale kept pace just behind her right shoulder, his palm pressed against the curve of her lower back in a parody of gentlemanly guidance. Under the fine fabric of his tailored dark suit, something rigid and metallic dug into her vertebrae, a firearm. The rules crystallized in Constance's mind without verbal instruction. No screaming, no sudden movements, no attempting to access her mobile device. As they passed a custodian working his mop near the guest services counter, Constance seized her opportunity. Her arm lowered casually to her side, digits choreographing silent symbols in the space between one pulse and the next. I need assistance. Armed man. The custodian's cleaning tool halted its rhythmic sweeping, liquid spreading across tile, yet his gaze remained fixed downward. Silas Henry had discovered decades ago that society's invisible workers observe everything. For 36 months, Silas had maintained the morning rotation at the Whitmore Grand, navigating his supply trolley through reception areas and corridors, sanitizing surfaces that visitors traversed without downward acknowledgement. Each mark revealed its narrative to him. The rubber streak beside the lift doors indicated someone's stumbling arrival, likely intoxicated. The brown beverage splash near the corporate workspace suggested a consultation gone sideways. In an environment that rendered him transparent, precision in his craft became his singular expression. But Silas's heightened observational habits stemmed from Matilda. His 7-year-old carried wild ringlets that escaped every attempt at containment and possessed a grin capable of illuminating spaces she could never orally experience. Born without hearing, Matilda had educated Silas in alternative perception. When your offspring cannot detect vocal summons, you master the art of monitoring window reflections and wall shadows. Each dawn before clocking in, Silas transported Matilda to the specialized learning facility 3 streets from his workplace. Their communication system was uniquely theirs, an amalgamation of formal American Sign Language and the private gestures households craft across years. A wrist tap signaled focus, an earlobe tug meant, "My love for you." A palm over the chest conveyed, "Safety surrounds you." Fellow parents occasionally extended sympathy Silas never solicited. Others voiced opinions about raising offspring through manual communication rather than auditory methods. Silas abandoned attempts at educating them. Matilda required no external validation. She needed a parent who remained present, who mastered her linguistic mode, who engineered security in her world. The morning had begun with an atypical directive. Silas collected his daily task list from the operations supervisor, but today's instructions carried unusual gravity. The premium guest corridor demanded absolute immaculacy, and all cleaning personnel received orders to function swiftly and silently. Avoid direct visual contact, suppress inquiries, minimize presence. Silas had observed Audrey Finn, the security director, circling the entrance hall with unusual frequency. Her fingers constantly adjusting the communication device connecting her to the surveillance network. Bridget Lewis, the chief receptionist whose warmth could neutralize hostile patrons and win over challenging vendors, had intercepted Silas near the elevator bay. "Today involves an unusual circumstance," she'd murmured, her attention darting toward the administrative suites. "Simply maintain low visibility and ensure 0 complications arise." Constance Whitmore had constructed a business dynasty on the foundation that premium service required absolute command. The Whitmore Grand served as the centerpiece of a hospitality empire spanning a dozen metropolitan areas. She'd inherited capital but earned credibility, converting outdated establishments into sought-after destinations. She comprehended economic forces, consumed financial statements like literature, and could identify a deteriorating asset 3 fiscal years before its collapse. Yet today, for the first occasion in her professional existence, Constance operated without authority. Leon Hale had intercepted her that morning in the underground parking structure, materializing from behind a support column. He presented himself in costly attire, communicated in controlled cadences, and handled his weapon with practiced ease. "We shall proceed into your establishment together," he'd outlined with disturbing calm. "You'll greet your personnel with appropriate warmth. Should you alert protection services or reach for communication devices, casualties will result." The hard object against her spine provided constant reinforcement. Leon orchestrated their route through the entrance hall, selecting pathways with reduced camera exposure, positioning himself so observers would perceive a business executive with her colleague, nothing unusual. His agenda was catastrophic. His leather case contained documentation bearing counterfeit board member authorizations. Upon Constance's signature, she would relinquish primary ownership to a fraudulent entity. The paperwork included provisions that would activate instantaneously, eliminating her decision-making capacity and rendering her dismissal inevitable. Leon had selected the hotel specifically because here, encircled by staff and her professional legacy, Constance would maintain proper behavior. One cannot create disturbances in a luxury establishment's public areas. Yet Constance possessed one resource Leon had failed to anticipate. 3 years prior, she'd underwritten an initiative supporting hearing-impaired youth, financing educational opportunities and adaptive technology. During the program launch, she'd attended instructional sessions, observing educators and students communicate through physical expression, through complete bodily engagement. The experience had compelled her to enroll in introductory sign language instruction, acquiring sufficient proficiency to exchange greetings with students and comprehend basic dialogue. She'd never conceived these gestures would transform into survival instruments. As she passed the Custodian station near the guest services area, Constance executed a split-second calculation. The man hunched over his cleaning equipment, but his image appeared in the polished stone beneath. More significantly, she recognized him. He consistently arrived before his shift began, escorted his daughter to the special education center adjacent to the hotel, occasionally occupied the staff rest area, practicing hand configurations from a sign language training manual. If anyone could interpret her soundless plea, this man could. Her digits moved with rehearsed accuracy. Assistance required. Firearm. Coerced documentation. Maintain downward focus. She continued forward, her expression composed. Her respiration measured. Behind her position, she registered the gentle sound of liquid meeting tile, the custodian's mop resuming its pattern, though slower presently, more calculated. Silas felt his cardiac rhythm accelerating as he monitored the reflection in the marble surface. The chief executive had just communicated to him through sign. "Help me, he carries a weapon." His immediate impulse was upward eye contact, but her final gesture was explicit: no upward gaze. Silas maintained his cleaning motion, maintained his breathing pattern. Should he vocalize for security personnel, Leon might respond with panic and discharge his weapon. Should he sprint for assistance, Constance would remain isolated with an armed individual. Should he execute no response, he would bear that burden indefinitely. 90 seconds for decision. Silas contemplated Matilda awaiting his after-school arrival. He contemplated the commitment to her deceased mother, preserve our daughter's safety, return home each evening. But he simultaneously contemplated his commitment to himself, never remain passive while another human suffers because intervention appears excessively hazardous. Silas positioned down his cleaning tool and retrieved the yellow warning marker. He advanced toward the premium guest elevators, positioning the marker directly obstructing Leon and Constance's trajectory. Saturated flooring, hazardous surface. A minor postponement, perhaps 30 seconds, but adequate to access the supply storage telephone without detection. Leon observed the cautionary marker and displayed displeasure. He redirected Constance toward the alternative corridor, his grip on her forearm intensifying incrementally. "This establishment maintains exceptional housekeeping standards," he remarked, his inflection suggesting exceptional housekeeping shouldn't create inconvenience for him. Silas mobilized rapidly once they'd progressed past. He accessed the supply storage and seized the telephone, inputting the 3-number extension for protective services. Audrey Finn responded on the initial ring. "Maintenance Division, state your requirement." "Silas Henry from Morning Rotation," he communicated quietly, his vocal delivery steady despite the biochemical surge flooding his nervous system. "I require you to monitor the premium guest route immediately. The chief executive faces danger. Her companion possesses a firearm. Avoid direct approach. Silent response exclusively." A pause materialized, then Audrey's voice returned, purely professional. "I'm reviewing camera feeds currently. Visual confirmation achieved. You're certain regarding the weapon?" She signed to me, sign language. She communicated he carries a gun and is compelling her to execute a contract. Another pause. "Remain on this connection. Maintain the line." Silas registered Audrey communicating rapidly with another party, her articulation abbreviated and businesslike. Then she returned. "I'm dispatching Bridget to manufacture a diversion in the primary entrance hall. I require you to execute something. Can you progress slowly down the premium guest corridor and generate legitimate justifications for delays? Create the appearance of standard maintenance activities. Purchase a temporal space to establish a controlled intervention." "Capability confirmed," Silas responded, and he meant it absolutely. For 36 months, he'd existed as invisible within this establishment. Today, transparency would become his most powerful asset. Years earlier, before Matilda's arrival, Silas had functioned in private protection, threat evaluation for corporate accounts. He demonstrated proficiency, maintaining composure under duress, identifying dangers before materialization. But then his spouse developed illness, cancer, aggressive and merciless. Following the memorial service, Silas resigned. The profession demanded an emotional detachment he no longer possessed. He required employment permitting home presence for Matilda that didn't mandate risking human lives. So he became transparent, a custodian, someone who sanitized surfaces and returned home every single evening. Yet the professional training never departed. He still detected when someone ambulated with their hand positioned in their garment at an unnatural orientation. He still evaluated exits and visual angles, computed response intervals, perceived the architecture of violence and motion. That training sustained his composure now. Leon was no beginner. Any direct confrontation would escalate to lethal rapidly. The singular viable approach was gradually undermining Leon's command, permitting security response without precipitating mass casualties. Silas retrieved his supply trolley and transported it down the premium guest corridor. He moved at his typical velocity, neither accelerated nor sluggish, a custodian, executing his responsibilities. Upon reaching the elevator cluster, he activated the service control and then, as though detecting a malfunction, executed a minor adjustment to the interface panel. He didn't deactivate the elevator system, but he did trigger the maintenance protocol, which would necessitate anyone utilizing it to request clearance initially. A minor intervention, scarcely perceptible, but it would compel Leon to select the service stairwell or await elevator authorization. Either selection translated to additional time. Leon and Constance arrived at the elevator cluster 90 seconds subsequently. Leon activated the call button and displayed frustration when no response occurred. A small notification on the interface indicated temporary maintenance protocol. He pivoted toward Constance. "Is this typical?" Constance maintained her facial neutrality. "Occasionally the system experiences technical irregularities. We can utilize the service stairwell." Leon's eyes contracted. Something registered as incorrect to him, though he couldn't isolate the specifics. The establishment felt excessively quiet, excessively vacant in locations that should have contained more personnel. He reinforced his grip on the leather case. "Service stairwell, immediately." Silas observed from his station near the housekeeping alcove, his body angled so he could monitor their reflections in an ornamental mirror without establishing direct eye contact. When they rotated toward the service stairwell, he mobilized again, this time approaching Bridget Lewis at the reception counter. Bridget elevated her gaze from her computer terminal, her professional warmth never wavering, even as her eyes transmitted urgency. Silas communicated quietly. He's directing her to the service stairwell. Audrey requires notification. Bridget's fingers raced across her keyboard, transmitting a message through the internal security network. Then she stood, smoothed her professional jacket, and advanced toward the main entrance where a cluster of guests had recently materialized. Her voice projected across the entrance hall, warm and inviting, directing personnel to assist with baggage, inquiring about dining reservations, manufacturing a buffer of normalcy that would convince Leon the hotel functioned as standard. But in the Security Operations Center 3 levels below, Audrey Finn was orchestrating a response that bore no resemblance to normalcy. She retrieved camera feeds from the service stairwell, the premium meeting chambers, and the executive administrative spaces. She contacted Ronnie George, the hotel's technology expert, and requested he commence documenting every camera perspective, every time marker, every element of evidence that would subsequently prove the events transpiring. Then she executed the most difficult communication of her professional life. She contacted law enforcement, but instructed them to position 3 blocks distant. Silent approach protocol, no auditory warnings, no visual alerts. Should Leon detect sirens, he would commence firing. Leon pushed open the service stairwell access and gestured for Constance to enter first. The stairwell was bare concrete and utilitarian, a stark contrast to the stone and crystal of the guest territories. As they ascended, Leon spoke for the first occasion in several minutes. "I had anticipated we could execute this in a civilized fashion. Enter a pleasant office, execute some documentation, separate as business colleagues. But your establishment seems determined to manufacture complications." Constance maintained her climbing rhythm, her footwear clicking against concrete. "I don't command elevator maintenance protocols." "Accurate," Leon acknowledged, "but you command considerable other elements, which is precisely why this documentation is necessary. You've constructed something impressive, Miss Whitmore. Unfortunately, you constructed it on a foundation my associates presently control. The financial obligation your grandfather generated 30 years ago, the leveraged acquisitions your father executed, the properties mortgaged and remortgaged, it all reaches settlement eventually. We're simply present to collect." They achieved the premium guest level, and Leon directed Constance down a corridor toward a compact conference chamber. The chamber featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the metropolitan area. On the table sat a leather portfolio Leon had positioned there earlier that morning. Inside was the contract already prepared, already authenticated by falsified signatures. It required only Constance's name. Leon sealed the door and gestured to seating. "Please sit. Review the documentation if you desire, though the terms are non-negotiable. You execute, you depart with your existence in professional standing. You refuse, and the narrative becomes considerably darker." Constance lowered herself slowly, drawing the portfolio toward her. She began reading, not because she intended to execute, but because every minute constituted another minute for assistance to materialize. Her hands trembled as she rotated pages, but her voice maintained steadiness. "This will require time. There are 12 pages of provisions." "Take your time," Leon stated, his hand inside his jacket, fingers on the weapon. "But not excessive time." Outside in the corridor, Silas moved with careful precision. He'd observed Leon and Constance enter the conference chamber, had witnessed the door seal, had noted the method Leon positioned himself between Constance and the exit. Silas couldn't enter the chamber without triggering violence, but he could command what transpired outside it. He utilized his cleaning trolley to partially obstruct the corridor, manufacturing a barrier that would decelerate anyone attempting rapid departure. Then he knelt beside an electrical receptacle and removed the cover plate as if examining for a wiring malfunction. To anyone monitoring the surveillance cameras, he was a maintenance worker executing routine tasks. To Audrey Finn, observing from 3 levels below, he was marking his position and indicating readiness. Audrey's voice emerged through the radio secured to Silas's belt, quiet enough that only he could register. "We have officers stationed at the northern and southern stairwells. Ronnie is recording everything. When I provide the signal, I require you to manufacture a distraction in the corridor, something that generates sound but doesn't resemble an assault. Capability?" Silas activated the button on his radio twice. 2 clicks signified affirmative. Inside the conference chamber, Constance was depleting pages to review. She'd extended the review as long as feasible, but now she was on the final page, and Leon was no longer willing to wait. "Sufficient," he stated, extracting a writing instrument from his pocket. "Execute the document, Miss Whitmore. Execute it now." Constance retrieved the writing instrument. She required a third alternative, something unexpected. She positioned the writing instrument on the signature line but didn't inscribe. Instead, she addressed Leon directly. "Before I execute, answer one inquiry. How did you acquire knowledge of my grandfather's financial obligation? That information was sealed 40 years ago." Leon smiled. "That's the elegance of patience. Information doesn't vanish. I've been planning this for 3 years. Every document, every secret your family buried, I located it all." His words constituted a confession, and Constance understood Leon wasn't functioning alone. There was insider collaboration. If there was insider collaboration, there would be evidence, and evidence meant this could be contested in judicial proceedings. She retrieved the writing instrument again, positioning her hand so her fingers could form configurations beneath the table where Leon couldn't observe. "Help now. Proximate." In the corridor, Silas perceived the sign through the glass panel. He stood, seized a metal implement tray, and dropped it. The clatter was enormous. Leon's head snapped toward the door. Silas knelt slowly, began gathering implements, muttering apologies. The distraction lasted 5 seconds, but 5 seconds was adequate. Audrey Finn and 2 law enforcement officers materialized at the corridor's terminus, moving silently. They positioned themselves on either side of the door. Audrey elevated 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. She opened the door. Leon spun toward the sound, his hand emerging with the weapon visible, but before he could aim, Constance moved. She'd been monitoring Silas through the glass, monitoring his hand signals. When Audrey opened the door, Silas signed one word: down. Constance dropped beneath the table as Leon's attention fragmented. Audrey and the officers rushed forward, weapons drawn, voices commanding. Leon reached for Constance but grasped air. He swung toward the officers. Then Silas stepped into the doorway and signed again. Constance could observe him from beneath the table. The signs were for Matilda, the private language of parent and offspring. "You are safe. It is finished. Come home." Leon rotated again, attempting to track excessive threats, and his command shattered. He raised the weapon. Officers commanded. Then Ronnie George, monitoring every camera, severed the conference chamber illumination remotely. In 3 seconds of darkness, officers, wearing night vision, moved with efficiency. When illumination returned, Leon was on the floor, weapons secured, hands restrained. He vocalized about legal representation and litigation, but no one listened. Audrey was reading him his rights while Ronnie's camera footage played on her tablet, displaying every moment from parking structure to conference chamber, a complete record of abduction and extortion. The arrest consumed 17 minutes. Leon was escorted out through the service entrance. Constance provided her statement in her office, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. When the detective inquired how she signaled for assistance, she explained about sign language, about Silas, about reflections in marble surfaces. The detective promised to commend the maintenance worker, but commendations weren't what Constance contemplated. As she sat isolated in her office an hour subsequently, she was contemplating how proximate she had come to dying in a structure she owned, surrounded by systems she had constructed. And she was contemplating how the individual who saved her was someone she had never conversed with, whose name she learned only that afternoon, who had been invisible until she desperately required him to observe. Elias Corbin, the district prosecutor, arrived the next morning with preliminary discoveries. Leon Hale wasn't functioning alone. He'd been financed by a shell corporation with organized crime connections, and he had insider assistance from someone in the Whitmore organization. That individual provided access codes, security schedules, and confidential family financial records. The investigation was ongoing, but arrests were forthcoming. Constance listened with calm that surprised her. She'd spent her professional life constructing barriers, manufacturing systems and hierarchies that maintained her separate from her personnel. She'd believed separation meant safety, that command meant security. Leon Hale had proven her wrong, brutally. She thanked Elias for his work and promised full cooperation with the investigation. Then she requested he depart. She had something else to execute. Silas was sanitizing the third level when Bridget located him. "The chief executive would like to see you in her office." Silas followed her to the executive level, ambulating on carpet so dense his footsteps generated no sound. He'd been here before, but only to empty waste receptacles after hours. Now, in daylight, the space felt foreign. Constance stood when he entered. She gestured to seating. "Please sit. I require to speak with you." Silas sat carefully, aware his uniform was still damp from mopping. Constance sat across from him, observing him as if attempting to comprehend how a custodian had become the most crucial individual in her structure. "I require to thank you," she stated, "and apologize. You saved my existence, and I never even knew your name. You've worked here 3 years, and I never once acknowledged your presence. That is unacceptable." Silas hadn't saved her for recognition. He'd saved her because it was right, because he couldn't exist with executing nothing, because his daughter was awaiting him to come home. Constance continued. "The law enforcement officers tell me you learned sign language for your daughter, that she is deaf. Is that correct?" "Affirmative," Silas stated quietly. "Yesterday, when I signed to you, you understood immediately. You didn't hesitate." "You needed assistance," Silas stated. "There wasn't time for hesitation." Constance nodded slowly. "I've been contemplating what transpired, about what it signifies. Yesterday I learned that authority is an illusion. The individual with the most command wasn't the chief executive or the man with the weapon. It was the custodian, who nobody noticed, who observed what others missed, who acted when action mattered." She advanced to the window. "I'm going to manufacture changes to this organization. Superior security, superior support for frontline personnel, but more than that, I want to establish a fund to support families with offspring who have disabilities, scholarships, therapy, equipment. I would like to name it in honor of your daughter." Silas felt something fracture open in his chest. "You don't need to execute that." "I know," Constance stated. "I want to. Because you learned her language, you were able to assist someone who desperately required it. That deserves to be honored." She returned to her desk. "I also want to offer you a different position, Director of Employee Safety and Wellness. You would oversee programs to ensure every worker has the resources and support they require. The compensation is substantially elevated, and the schedule is flexible for your daughter." Silas stared. "I'm a custodian. I don't possess a college degree." "You possess something superior," Constance stated. "The ability to observe invisible individuals, the courage to act when others freeze, the lived experience of being overlooked. This organization requires someone who comprehends what that feels like, because that is how we construct systems that actually protect individuals." Silas contemplated Matilda, about medical expenses, about the cramped apartment, about the future he desired for his daughter. He contemplated real transformation requiring individuals who comprehended what needed transforming, not from textbooks, but from experiencing it. "I accept," he stated. 3 months subsequently, on a cold afternoon in early spring,
Constance stood in the entrance hall of the Whitmore Grand as a new commemorative plaque was unveiled near the main entrance. The plaque listed emergency protocols, including a silent alert system permitting any employee to signal danger without speaking. The system had been designed by Silas, implemented by Audrey, and financed by the Matilda Henry Foundation for Children with Disabilities. Matilda was there, holding her father's hand, observing with curious eyes as individuals gathered. She didn't fully comprehend what was transpiring, but she comprehended her father was being honored, and that made her smile with fierce pride. Constance approached them and signed carefully. "Your father is a hero." Matilda's eyes widened. She looked at Silas, who nodded. Then Matilda signed back. "I know, he is my dad." Subsequently, after the ceremony concluded, Constance found herself isolated with Silas near the guest services counter where everything had begun. The marble surface still gleamed, still reflected everything. But now when Constance looked down, she observed not just her reflection, but Silas standing beside her, equal and necessary. "I never thanked you properly," she stated.
Silas shook his head. "You thanked me with action. The fund, the employment position, the safety protocols, those elements will assist individuals long after I'm gone." "Still," Constance stated, and then she signed instead of speaking. "Thank you. You saved my existence. You transformed everything." Silas signed back. "You gave me a chance to matter. That gift goes both directions." Matilda ran across the entrance hall and seized her father's hand, pulling him toward the exit. Silas waved to Constance and permitted himself to be led away. His daughter's laughter, a sound he couldn't register but could feel in her bouncing steps. Constance observed them depart, and for the occasion in years she felt hope, not calculated hope of quarterly earnings, but raw hope that came from knowing you'd been wrong about everything and selecting to be right going forward. She returned to her office and sat at her desk, observing the city. Somewhere in that city, Leon Hale sat in a jail cell awaiting judicial proceedings. Somewhere, his accomplice, a senior vice president who had betrayed the company, had been arrested. And somewhere, a 7-year-old girl who couldn't register sound was teaching her father new signs, new methods of observing the world. Constance retrieved her phone and contacted the foundation office. "I want to expand our reach, not just offspring with disabilities, every family that struggles, every parent working multiple employment positions, every individual who feels invisible. I want them to know they matter. Find me the programs that execute that work." The director promised to compile a list. Constance concluded the communication and advanced to the window, observing the sun descend over structures where millions existed in visible existences. For so long she'd believed success meant rising above them. Now she comprehended it meant reaching down, pulling others upward, constructing systems that recognized everyone's humanity. She contemplated Silas, mopping surfaces in a structure she owned, observing danger in a reflection. She contemplated Matilda, laughing with her whole heart. She contemplated the documentation she'd nearly executed, the empire nearly lost, the existence saved by a custodian who refused to look away. The city darkened as night descended, illumination coming on in windows across the skyline. Constance pressed her palm against the glass and made a commitment. She would not forget, she would not return to the comfortable distance that separated chief executives from the individuals who sanitized their offices. She would not permit the fear to fade and the lessons disappear. She'd been given a second opportunity, pulled back from darkness by hands that signed instead of shouted, by courage that required no audience, by a parent's love teaching him to observe what others missed. That opportunity came with responsibility, to honor it, to learn from it, to become the kind of leader who comprehended that real authority wasn't command over others, but manufacturing conditions where everyone could thrive. Constance rotated from the window and sat at her computer. She had work to execute, systems to construct, policies to inscribe, futures to shape. But for the first occasion in her professional life, the work felt less like conquest and more like service.
less like ascending and more like constructing, less like proving worth and more like recognizing everyone else's.
In the entrance hall far below, the night rotation custodian began his rounds. He ambulated the same corridors Silas had ambulated, pushed the same trolley, mopped the same surfaces. But now when he worked knowing his labor was observed, his presence acknowledged, his humanity recognized. The marble gleamed beneath his mop, reflecting his image back to him, and he smiled at what he observed. An individual who mattered, a worker with dignity, a human being whose value wasn't measured by title or compensation, but by the simple truth that he appeared, executed his responsibilities, and deserved respect for both. That was the legacy of a terrifying afternoon when a chief executive signed for assistance and a custodian refused to look away. Not just an existence saved, but a system transformed. Not just a criminal apprehended, but a foundation constructed. Not just gratitude expressed, but dignity restored. The Whitmore Grand Hotel stood tall against the night sky, its windows glowing with existence, its future unfolding one careful, conscious decision at a time. And somewhere in that structure, a marble surface reflected everything, holding the memory of the day when reflection became revelation, when a signal became salvation, when invisible became essential. The narrative concluded there, but the legacy continued. In scholarships financed and existences transformed, in protocols inscribed, in dignity restored. In a 7-year-old girl growing upward knowing her father was a hero, in a chief executive learning that authority meant nothing without humanity.